All right, you guys, we just ended our discussion on what it means to be an inequality. An example of an inequality is x is greater than or equal to 4. We talked about the number line and how it goes from left to right with the negative numbers going this way and the positive numbers going this way. So I have a couple examples that if I go too fast, just pause the video and copy down and then keep going. But here's one example. If I start with the numbers -3, -4, -5, those numbers are less than -3. And it's less than or equal to because I'm including -3 in my set. And so if I were going to graph x is less than or equal to -3, here's what it would look like. I'm going to put a closed dot because of this equal sign right here. And I'm going to shade to the left because all of these numbers that get smaller than -3, remember it's kind of confusing because the bigger numbers when they're negative actually are smaller. We're going this direction. That means we're shading to the left, and I'm shading the arrow also. Something that might be new to you is called interval notation. How do we formally write this without having to draw a number line? So you always write left to right. And since our arrow is going to the left forever means negative infinity. And where is my shading stopping? It's stopping right here at -3. So that's what I'm putting here. And since this is a closed circle, I'm putting a bracket here. If it was an open circle, which we kind of briefly talked about during class, I would use a parentheses. I'll talk about that when I get to that example. There's a couple more things that you might want to get copied down. This is just a little bit of review for you. In symbolic notation, when the arrow points to the left, that means less than. And if it has that equal bar, it means less than or equal to. So left, see how it's pointing to the left? That means less than. If we're going to the right, that means greater than. On a number line, the bigger numbers are to the right. So that means that we're shading to the right and the arrow matches. See how it's pointing to the right just like this one? And when there's an equal sign, meaning it includes that number, you have your bar there. I'm just going to go through a couple examples so that you can quickly kind of see how to do some of these, and then we'll practice them in class, okay? So the very first example, x is greater than 6. I'm going to put 6 right in the middle of my line. You know that it goes forever this way and this way. And so I'll put maybe a couple more numbers, 7, 8, this would be 5 and 4. And yes, the arrows mean that it continues left and right forever. I am going to put an open circle on 6 because this does not have an equal sign to it. And this arrow is pointing to the right, which means I am going to shade to the right, including this arrow. Let's try another one. X is less than 2/7. So 2/7 is a fraction, but don't let that freak you out. It is between 0 and 1. It's a fraction that is less than 1, but greater than 0. And again, it has an open circle because there's no equal sign here. So I'm going to put an open circle right there. And it's telling me to shade to the left. So I'm going this way. Less than would be this way, including 0 and including all the negative numbers forever. Let's try number 5. X is greater than or equal to -3. So be careful when you're doing your negative numbers. Remember, if they go left, that would be -4, and to the right would be -2, because eventually we'd be approaching -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the right. I'm going to put a circle on -3, but since this one has an equal sign, I'm going to close it. So that means I'm going to fill it in. And the alligator mouth is pointing this direction, which means greater than. It matches this arrow, so I'm going to shade to the right. And I'm going to color in my arrow. Now let's try a couple of these. These I want you to be careful with. You have to think about the alligator mouth. And so I always want the X to be on the left. And so therefore what we can do is we can change this into X is greater than 7. Why did the sign flip? Which way is the alligator mouth trying to eat? If you think about this as like an alligator mouth, there's the little teeth. Which one is the alligator mouth trying to eat? The alligator mouth is trying to eat the X. And so when you reverse it and put the X on the left, the alligator is still trying to eat the X. So just be careful about that. And now it looks like one of those easier problems that we did on the first page. So I'm going to put 7 here. That would be 8. That would be 6. I'm going to put an open circle on 7 because this does not have an equal sign. And this is telling me to shade to the right, so it matches this arrow. So I'm going this direction. One thing that I want you to be really careful of, I don't want you to just look at this right here and think the arrow's pointing left. That means I need to shade this direction. I want you to have the X on the left because these can get really tricky. That's like intentionally trying to trick you, and make sure you're paying close attention. Reverse it. That will always make sure that you know which way to shade. This arrow, shade this direction, but the X has to be on the left. Let's try one more, then I'll go down to the bottom. So -5. This would be -4, this would be -6. Why is that again? These are negative numbers, so as I go this direction, I'm getting close to 0, and then it would turn positive and continue going to the right. I'm going to also reverse this. The X is not on the left, so I'm going to reverse it myself so that it is. Alligator mouth here is eating the -5, so that sign's going to switch. It's going to point this way, and it's going to continue eating the -5. See that mouth? Eating the -5. Here the mouth is also eating the -5. I'm going to put a closed circle on -5. It is closed once again because this has an equal sign with it. That means it includes -5. And I'm going to shade this direction and this arrow. Fill it in. That's because this arrow now is pointing this direction, so go that way. A few things about interval notation and then we'll be finished. If we have a less than or a greater than sign, that's when you use a parentheses for interval notation. That's that weird thing I mentioned on the first page. If we do not have, if we have an equal bar with our less than or our greater than symbol, that is when we use the bracket. Okay, and that's the difference between open circle, they always use these. Closed circles always use these. Same thing, parentheses go with open circles and brackets go with closed circles. So let's just try a few. One thing to keep in mind is that interval notation, infinity always gets a parentheses. That's just a mathematical rule. You cannot include infinity because infinity goes forever. So those always have parentheses. So let's try doing a couple of these and then we'll be finished. I'm going to start with number 11. It helps me to have a number line. So I'm going to put 2 on there. And 1 would be over here and 3 would be over here. This means the X is on the left, so I'm positioned in the right way. That means open circle on 2. And that means I'm going to shade to the right. So I'm shading this way, including my arrow. And how do I write this in interval notation? Well, where do I start? You start on the left. And it looks like I have something special happening at 2. So I'm going to start by writing 2, comma, and it goes to the right forever. How do we write in math to the right forever? We use positive infinity. It's a sideways 8. And because this is an open circle, that means parentheses. And because what we wrote up here, infinity always has parentheses. So I'm going to put a parentheses there. Let me do one more. X less than or equal to -5. It helps me to have a number line, so I'm going to put -5 here. That would mean -4 is here and -6 is here. Remember, that means we're just getting closer to 0 as we move to the right, and then the positive numbers start. This means closed circle on -5, so closing it. And the X is on the left, so I'm in the right position. Shade to the left, so I'm going this way. You guys can use highlighters if you want to, different colored pens or pencils, whatever. Now, how do I write this in interval notation? So my shading is going to the left forever. That means all the way to -infinity. And remember, infinity always has a parentheses on it. So that's always a parentheses when you use infinity. And where does my shading stop? It looks like it stops here at 5, and I do not have any more shading or coloring after that. So I'm going to put -5. This is a closed circle though, so that means bracket. So big difference between number 11. This was an open circle, which means parentheses on the number. This is a closed circle, which means bracket. These are probably the hardest ones. Now let's practice some in class and call me over so that we can look at them together.